everyone, my name is Moonshine and I'm the AMA host. Um, and today we have Instruxi with us here today, which is the future of real world asset tokenization. And it is being built by this, project. So listening, we have Matthew here with us who is going to break down the uBuild, which deploys production grade tokenized assets at the speed of AI, the trust synchronization, and the Match ID privacy first identity for real world asset tokenization. So before we start diving through what the project is about and what it is built on, I don't know, Matthew, if you'd like to introduce yourself, the team behind the project, and how you guys started the project in Truxie.
Yeah, love to. Thanks, and hi everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. So, a bit of background on myself. I came out of university and I started working for a credit rating company. So, my job was to write reports, analytical reports on the creditworthiness of insurance companies. And we'll take a look at their balance sheet and interview them and come up with a report. I was also a coder, so I started working on automating ratings and did that for a few years and built an automated rating engine. And so the concept of merging finance and analytics and technology started very young for me. I then went to work at PricewaterhouseCoopers, did a number of things, again, looking at huge, big accounting systems, working with them. Got to implement SAP, worked on some amazing products, did some audit support work, and did that for 6 years, and then set up my own business. Business I set up was around building audit and analytical systems that really integrated large enterprise systems, and there's kind of this journey to get to blockchain, I guess, and to integrate enterprise systems and so we built these analytical and audit systems, and that company did pretty well. And I ended up selling that company and moving to the US. There I worked with the company that bought me for many, many years. And we used to do analytics and audit over, and there's different kind of audit. It was called a recovery contract compliance audit. But over most of the world's grocery retail data, whether it's Tesco's, Auchan, Carrefour, Walmart, etc., etc. So it was about 6 petabytes of data a week. So again, finance, numbers, audit, detail, analytics, big data. I joined I joined Ernst & Young, and I spent some time in the Middle East on the Aramco IPO project, and really started to look at different forms of technologies that were coming through. And I got really interested in blockchain, and I met Paul Brody in Ernst & Young and started working with him. And he was the global blockchain leader. Many of you might know Paul Brody. He's been quite a face in our world for quite some time. He's produced a really good book to help enterprises look at the kind of use cases for blockchain. And back in 2016, whilst at Ernst & Young, I worked with Paul and a number of folks and launched an intercompany accounting blockchain system. So the ability to connect to Oracle, JD Edwards, SAP, and big enterprise accounting systems, connect blockchain to those accounting systems, and then when you raise a purchase order, have a sales order mirrored. When you raise an invoice or a bill, have the opposing documentation mirrored in the system through a blockchain ledger, with blockchain maintaining a central ledger. So if you're an organization with 60 systems, all enterprise systems, you can use blockchain to remove all reconciliations from your accounting systems and auto post between the systems. So for large enterprises, they could start to use blockchain in an unusual way to mitigate one of the biggest headaches that enterprises have, which is the fact that many of them have more intercompany transactions, intercompany loans, intercompany products, intercompany billing. Then they do external transactions. And so really like the technology, and we started to create hybrid ecosystems where how does blockchain and big data work together? And we started to look at data marketplaces. Now, my business partner, Austin, he joined the company that acquired my business straight out of college. And then he worked with me in Ernst & Young, and he focused and specialized on distributed systems and data federation. So how do I work with massive data sets across big enterprises? And then he joined Chainlink, and I carried on in my career path. And then he came out of Chainlink, and we formed Instruxi. And why, what we built around Instruxi and why we formed Instruxi. Instruxi is Latin word for, it's a root word for I instruct, I build. And so it fits with us. We realized that the problem we've been trying to solve and is how do we make normal enterprise systems work with blockchain in a seamless and trust minimized way? How do we take the principles of blockchain and apply them to Web 2 systems? And how do we make Web 2 systems act seamlessly with Web 3 systems? And by doing so, we realize we fix a number of problems that exist in enterprises today about why data doesn't scale, how security works, how user authentication works. And by applying blockchain and the principles of consensus decentralized systems over distributed systems, you actually get a much more secure and scalable ecosystem. But applying that to a Web3 framework is that we can now work with big data within a Web3 ecosystem, and we can also work by integrating Web 2 and Web 3 so they operate as one ecosystem. And that's really what Instruxi was about. It was bringing together years of experience by our team. And so we built a team that spans app development, DApp development, some really good guys on Solidity, Volk specialists, to come up with a number of products that we can get into to help facilitate how enterprises move into our ecosystem and participate in open finance.
I really appreciate that background about how you guys started the project and what the foundation of the project is like. Really appreciate that. So I think my first question is I see on your homepage of the website the team positions the project as continuous verification as superior to the traditional 90-day audit cycle. So how exactly is this verification scoped internally? And are you continuously validating smart contract integrity, off-chain data consistency, or business logic drift? Or which of these layers are produced institutionally and looked at with the risks during testing?
Okay, so good questions. When we think about verification, there's a number of things to think about. So let's talk first of all at the data layer. So we have a product called TrustSync. Now, what problem are we trying to solve? If we think about going back to that original intercompany accounting platform back in 2016, what was special about that is that it auto-posted. It was connected to the subledger of enterprise systems. And if you look back at some of the patents, if you're really inclined, that we got around that, we had to take an approach on how we communicated with those systems. And then we actually, in some ways, we had to come up with new token standards as Ernst & Young in order to facilitate accounting across those systems. It wasn't an easy task. So I worked with some really clever folks who were able to figure that out, but the principle remains the same. How do I communicate in a trustless way with an enterprise system? Well, Chainlink came along, and they developed some wonderful products, Chainlink Functions being one of them, and Chainlink Proof of Reserve, Chainlink CRE. Now, when we think about those products, we think about how they work, you can actually build their products like Lego bricks, and you can architect their products in a way to solve complex problems. But there's some additional technology that's needed. But let's talk about governance on the first layer. The information that proves an asset is an asset typically resides off chain. If it's the title for a vehicle, or then that will be in an object store somewhere. If it's the title for property, but the price for the property will be a feed, might be from Zillow or Realtor or Rightmove, but there will be a feed that verifies the price, whatever the asset is. There will be documents that specify who owns that asset and what the terms of ownership are for that asset. And in the real world asset tokenization, we need to have access to that information. And that information needs to be independently verified. But step one, we've got to connect and we've got to plumb all the data sources. So when we think about that, if we're dealing with lots of systems, then we have to use techniques around caching and data federation, etc. But we're using Chainlink Functions for our communications. We're using CRE to build the workflows. And typically we use a proof of reserve, or we'll use CRE to build our own oracles. And in order to create that verification, so if we have an asset that says, let's say we've got an apartment block with 500 properties in it, there is some data coming in from Airbnb on the frequency these properties are being rented, with the amounts, etc. So we want to feed to that data. We want that feed verified, and we want to know that we're connected to the data feed, that we trust the information coming from that feed. So we're hitting that API, we're forming a consensus over that, or we're running multiple APIs against the data feed. We want the ownership of that property recorded. We want to get access to that. So we want to have that either connected to the client's S3 object store, or we want to have a copy of that information, or a caching framework in StoreJ, or some kind of decentralized object store somewhere where if you hold the token, you can get access to the data to verify that the asset is real. So we've got to build these architected systems where we're using Chainlink products at the data layer to connect to the data and verify the data, verify the connectivity we have, and do it in a way that minimizes latency and maximizes trust. Now, what makes this work? And so the next layer above that is the governance layer. Now, who has access to this information? Now, the first thing we built was part of TrustSync, was the ability to create these workflows. Now, if you think of how a Chainlink proof of reserve works, you may or may not know that, but you set a number, and the number is the reserve number, and you can't mint more tokens so long as you set this up correctly. Let's say my property is worth $100 million, and I'm only going to mint $80 million against that property in ERC20s. You set a treasury contract. You'll tie your proof of reserve, and now the proof of reserve will control the amount of tokens that you can mint against the value, against the data. Now, that requires a lot of steps. So the first step is who can actually set the number of what the value is. And so you need governance around who can input that number. The second thing is who can sign off that administrator or whoever put the number is actually did it correctly. Now, if I was, when I run payroll, I don't run, I'm the final person as the CEO of the business, I'm the last guy who signs payroll. So there's always someone who signs it first up to a certain amount, and then there's someone who verifies it, me, and then countersigns it and authorizes the transfer of the cash. Well, that's how all businesses work. You have segregated duties. So we're applying those type of control processes to how we build these data feeds. And so someone will authorize a number and someone will sign that number off. Now, with certain infrastructure, like if you look at the Genius Act and how we deal with stablecoins, there is a third leg of authorization. And you might have like 5 deep. So George can sign off $1 million. Susan can sign off $10 million. George has to go to Susan if it's $1.5 million. If it's 100 million, Susan has to go to Trevor, and so on and so forth. So you have these complex workflows of authority to segregate duties and authorization. But the Genius Act and other acts like MiCA require that things like stablecoins have a third leg, which is an independent attestation by a third-party company. So if I'm tokenizing gold, the company will have a pile of gold, and they will say, we have 1 million ounces of gold. Someone has to come in and verify that, and there are different methods of doing that, and they have to produce a report that says we verify this is correct. Well, what we do with TrustSync is harden that verification process with a signing event. So you have a multi-signing attestation governed by segregated duties from authorized people. So the second layer above the data verification is the governance layer, which is part of what we built for TrustSync. Now, how does that work? This is kind of the unique aspect about Instruxi and our thinking from the very beginning of what we did. Now, when we go back to kind of our legacy, we work with big data, and big data doesn't scale very well. And so if you have, let's say you're an enterprise and you've got 10 SAP systems and 2 Oracle systems, and you want to create a consolidated report, there are a number of ways that you can do this, but ultimately you have to create a reporting system and bring all the data in, and now you've got risk and issue and latency. And one of the reasons you have to do that is that each system has its own governance. It has its own IDs. It has its own policies about what you can and can't do in that system. Now, when you try and create a consolidated view of something across multiple systems, you always come across this policy and identification issue. And one of the first things we set out to solve was, what if we could unlock who you are and what you can do in a decentralized world? So think of it that if I have an ability to create a decentralized ID, which of course we all know, there's loads of them out there, I can create an ID and I can soul bound my biometrics to that ID, and there's loads of different ways of doing it. We work with a lot of KYC providers who will verify who you are, but in a private way. And I can have your ID verified through Chainlink oracles and available on multi-chain, soul bound to you as a person. Then the thing that was missing is, what can you do? Your policies, which can be applied at a wallet level or at an ID level. So if I want you to query, have access to a piece of data in Postgres, then we created the ability for sign-in with Ethereum over Postgres. So we ended up building lots of SDKs and TypeScript frameworks, so you could build a metadata layer over enterprise systems, and we decentralized the policy engine. So you can write open policy agents to a wallet. So ultimately what it means is that I can create governance over what you can access and what you can do in a Web 2 and Web 3 environment. So think I've got my verification layer for my data. I've got my governance layer for my workflow. And now I can automate access across all of these systems by unlocking the identification and policy layer from the subsystems. So blockchain now actually becomes a governance and control layer for enterprise systems, which means that if I mint a token and that token is connected to an asset and the verification of that asset exists in a Web2 system, I can treat that as one ecosystem. And that ecosystem can always be verified and can always be on and can always be pinging the systems that prove the asset is real. And how you build that out, how you architect that differs on a case-by-case basis. So those are our two foundational products: TrustSync for building the data connectivity, the golden thread, and the Enforcer is our decentralized policy and governance layer that goes on top, so you can start to build really complex workflows and policies that govern what can be done and can't be done in a Web 2 and Web 3 ecosystem. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it definitely does. And I really appreciate how you break down all of this as behind the project. I'm not 100% technical person, but the way you begin to explain what the project is like and what you guys target is, it makes it more interesting to listen to. So thank you very much. I have a few other questions to ask, though while you're explaining, we're kind of, on the time mark of when we start accepting community questions. So probably this next few questions I would ask, you could just like try to summarize it so we can be able to take in community questions. Okay, is that fine?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, so while you were explaining, I think something that stood interest to me was seeing that you guys strongly lean into institutional trust language rather than retail crypto narratives. Now, was this a deliberate branding decision to distance Instruxi from speculative tokenization platforms? And has there been any challenge trying to position being in the market, knowing that most of the projects right now, what dominates the market right now are hype-driven attention?
So we have worked with institutional level for some time, and this is really where we believe the market is heading to. But open finance is really, DeFi is really important. So what you've been able to generate, what we've been able to generate in DeFi is whole new revenue systems and whole new economies using digital assets and tokenized asset-backed securities, which is now the new framework. And what DeFi and open finance has created is a thirst for liquidity, and that's really exciting. So, but the assets are held off-chain typically for the real-world asset, and this is what we need in DeFi: stable coins and real-world assets to bring in with income-generating assets that can fuel sustainable ecosystems. So, if we look at some of the old ecosystems like Curve succeeds because Curve makes a profit, and they have a really great VE tokenomic structure, and they do really well. We've seen some really great products that have come out. Hyperliquid doing really, really well. So how can we take the best of what goes on in DeFi and add the best of what goes on in TradFi and bring the two together? Now, we were all, I'm sure every single person on this call was involved in some way in a 2020 or 2021 rug as the victim, where there were so many, because there was no control. People weren't doxed. There was no way of verifying who folks really were in the ecosystem, and we all got PTSD, and we don't trust anything that goes on in Web3, and that's a problem. So by bringing the governance of Web2 into a Web3 ecosystem, we're able to bind the two together. Now, we work with RAC really closely. So we provide TrustSync support to the RAC ecosystem. We provide one of the major treasury contracts that holds the assets behind the RAC ecosystem. So we support them. They're a phenomenal product. They've launched a stable coin. They're doing all sorts of assets, of real world assets, but they work very closely with the Curve ecosystem. And so they're able to generate really good yield on the types of assets that they're bringing in. And so we do try and fulfill that side of the ecosystem. We do try and work with various different partners. We have clients who are bringing on and launching their own tokens. We have companies who are launching their own completely unique blockchain-enabled financial products for the Web2 ecosystem or for the retail ecosystem, but powered by blockchain. So we're not isolated from what's going on in DeFi. We support what's going on in DeFi, but we support it in a controlled manner. Our objective is to support the bringing of real-world assets in a safe and governed and controlled way. Now, you think of kind of who's leading in this territory. Most of the guys who own assets are banks and family offices and private investors. And a lot of them are still very nervous. I think maybe only 2 or 3% of the world owns wallets. And I don't know the official statistics, but the majority of the world aren't really in DeFi. Even when they're practicing in crypto, they're mostly working with centralized exchanges. So we've got a long way to go, but we're going to make it safe for both the people who participate in the token economy and the people who have assets that want to unlock new sources of revenue.
Great. So I wanted to also ask, do you guys have like a token, or it's just, the project infrastructure? Is there like an Instruxi token?
That's a great question. We get asked that a lot. So I'll tell you a couple of bits. So you will very soon see that a lot of our clients will be launching their own tokens. And those tokens will typically be based on economies. They won't be speculative. None of our clients have speculative tokens. They all have fairly complex economic ecosystems. So watch this space for announcements about our clients' tokens. Some have already launched. Some are launching very, very shortly. They're all underpinned by rigorous tokenomics and either real-world assets or treasury profitability focused contracts that are yield-bearing, with a number of stable coins coming on. Where we are looking, we have a product called uBuild. uBuild is a AI-enabled collection of our years and years and years of code that is structured in Lego bricks to give a deterministic outcome when you're building an app or a dApp. What I mean by that is, because we have the enforcer, because we have our core governance structures and the way we do things, if you want to spin up a Fireblocks wallet or a Privy wallet, you want to abstract, or you want to create a vault contract, or you want to use StoreJ or MinIO or Postgres or connect to an enterprise system, we've done it. We built all of those, but we built it in a way that our repos can be utilized as Lego bricks. So we've created uBuild for you to communicate to your agent what exactly you want built, and it will build it for you. So we can create apps and dApps very, very quickly using our Lego bricks with fully tested code. Very shortly, you will see us launch an AI agent on our website that will build an app for you while you communicate with it. And you'll have a scaffolded app with a basic front end within minutes. It will be functional. And unlike using like your standard vibe coding platform where you're having to plumb bits in together, reuse bits, having to create APIs for the very first time, we've done pretty much everything you're going to need. And so we're going to be launching that. Now, where we're looking at our token economy is around credits for that. So watch this space. We're working on that. We've been doing this. We've been building for a long time, since 2016 for me personally. It's slightly longer for my business partner, but as Instruxi, we're 5 years. We're 5 years as a growing business with clients. And the issue when you launch a token, we've seen this, we've observed this, is now your job becomes to sell a token, and you're no longer selling a business, building a business. You're lucky if you can pull off doing both, but they take an enormous amount of resources. So we're in no hurry to issue a token. We're in a hurry to build and continue to build a thriving business that is profitable and generating innovative products. And then when we launch our token, it will be a token based on a rigorous token economy with a existing client base that has real utility and real value for the participants of that token economy. So again, watch the space on that, but thank you for asking the question.
Yeah, thank you too for explaining. 2016 is quite a very long time. So,
I'm an old man.
Yeah,
yeah, it is a long time.
That though. So, thank you so much. I think at this point, okay, one last question I'm just curious about is the kind of partnerships you guys are looking for right now, or are you guys already partnered with like any company, organizations, something to extend what you guys are building globally?
Yeah, love that. So on the infrastructure side, we're partnered with Chainlink, both as a reseller and also as a Chainlink build partner. And we have other partnerships with various different providers, wallet providers, etc., KYC providers. We're building that partnership. And in fact, as part of our uBuild ecosystem, we're building a marketplace for those wrapped products so that people can vibe code and contract directly with those. So infrastructure partners we're building out, that's wonderful. In terms of other types of partners, this is new for us. So we built uBuild for ourselves to build client apps quicker than we were doing. And then we've started to pilot other clients using uBuild so they can generate their products very, very quickly. And we will be releasing uBuild to developers for them to pilot and build their own applications and accelerate those applications. So we'll be starting to look for development companies who want to work with unique IP, unique way of doing things with verified infrastructure, tested infrastructure, where they know that if they're deploying a data environment, that they know that environment will work with wallets, that has been tested, that the smart contracts will have been audited, and that they can deploy safely. So we're definitely looking for those kind of scaling partners, people who will take our products and build with them and deploy with them. And we have commercial models around that. And then if those developers create unique IP, well, that goes in the marketplace as a microservice. It gets tested, it gets deployed, and they have an option of selling that unique IP to other clients. That's really where we want to focus. We want to get the community building. I'm sorry, would you say again?
Yeah, I was struggling with my microphone. So thank you for walking us through that. It's great to see how you guys intend to reach out to other organizations or companies having same goals with what you guys are actually building. So right now we would be taking some community questions. So guys, I can see a lot of questions, a lot of tags in the comment section. So, but I will be starting with the live questions first. So if you have questions for Instruxi, kindly signify by raising your hands, and I will definitely unmute you. So let's start with, you can go ahead with your question.
Hello, Moonshine. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can.
Thanks for having me here. So my question is, so please, I just want to be sure you can hear me well. Hello, Matthew.
Hey, Ovi, how are you?
So there are a lot of background noise. I can't really get what you're saying. So try to adjust the background, and then you can signify or raise your hand and I'll mute you again. So let's have Elson. Elson, you can go ahead with your question, mate.
Thank you, Moonshine. Hi, March. It's nice to have you here again. So I was going through your website and I saw something. You emphasize assets mobility without infrastructure migration. So I'm just curious to know, does that mean that institutions can retain legacy systems entirely while still accessing on-chain settlements and tokenization?
Yeah, thanks. What a great question. I appreciate you asking that. 100%. You don't have to rebuild your infrastructure. We can just connect to your infrastructure and we can verify the infrastructure the same way that we run consensus algorithms over blockchain nodes. We can do exactly the same with Web2 data. So if I'm connecting to the data, I can be verifying that the data I'm connected to is the right data, that the table I'm connected to in that database is the right table, that the data I'm pulling from is the right data. And then the governance framework, the enforcer, can verify that only this row, this column, this field can be accessed by this query that can be controlled by this person. So yeah, you don't need to rip out. You can deploy our ecosystem, or we can connect to your ecosystem. If you've got assets, then they can be tokenized super quickly. And so long as you have data sources that verify that the asset is real, then brilliant. And what's so clever about what we're seeing today with stablecoins is, and especially I'm going back to what RAC are doing, you don't have to lose custody of the assets either. So for instance, if you have oil in the ground and now that's on a balance sheet because they're proven reserves, and you want to forward tokenize the future cash value of that oil, you can do that without giving up custody, because that can be used to support stablecoins because it's on a balance sheet and subject to the rules of the nation upon which the asset resides and where they're looking at their marketplace. It could be used for collateralization, it could be used for funding, it could be used for shared ownership, lots of ways of doing it. So yeah, don't rip out your existing stuff. Let's just connect with it, and you can have both ecosystems. For us, blockchain is just another piece of technology that does some really cool stuff, but there are things that it can't do, and so we have to create hybrid systems that take the best of both worlds and make them work in a trustless way.
All right, great. Thanks very much for your detailed explanation. It's great to see that we can actually, have both ecosystems running at the same time. Yeah, so that'll be all from me. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you so much, Elson, for that great question. It was nice hearing from you as well. So let's have Ophi again. Okay, you have an unmuted, you can ask a question now.
No, thanks for having me back. So my question is, most blockchain projects, they focus heavily on like technology, but they often overlook user education and accessibility for non-technical users. So my question is, what strategy is Instruction implementing to simplify onboarding? Like strategies are you simplify onboarding, improve mass adoption, and make the ecosystem usable for people who are just completely new to Web3? Did you get that?
Yeah, I did. Thank you. It's a problem we're trying to solve. Here's the thing. Most people in Web3, so people under 35 are really good at this. And they've had a wallet for a very long time. The guys that are really struggling are those that are over 45, that don't trust the ecosystem, or they came in 2020, 21, they got burnt and they've gone, or they just live on Coinbase and they're missing out on the massive opportunity. So we're trying to solve for that. And so thank you. If you think about why it's taken so long for banks to get involved, because they're really nervous. They don't really understand the difference between Ethereum or an ERC20. So uBuild solves that. If you want to get into the ecosystem, you don't actually need to know anything about blockchain. You can just tell the product what it is you want to build. I want to build a file sharing system for doctors to be able to share medical records between hospitals, but using a wallet so it's super secure. I want a verified doctor with a KYC who is authenticated as a doctor who belongs to a certain hospital. I want that mathematically provable. I want to know that when they share a file, that file is completely private. I want them to know that the patient authorizes that the file can be shared, so that the liability for sharing the file resides with the patient and not with the doctors, both on the recipient and also on the provider. And we've done all that. And you can, that very use case for issuing prescriptions, for paying for prescriptions, for issuing IDs, for issuing access to large data sources, for selling weather data, for launching a crypto, all of that is built in uBuild, and you don't need to know anything about blockchain to build an application that looks like a Web 2 application, uses all the best elements of Web 3, feels like a Web 2 application, is on Android or iPhone or a progressive web app, and you can deploy these things, not know a thing about blockchain. And I guess the hardest thing for folks is understanding, what do I do with this? How do I make money? How does my business survive? That's something we're writing articles about. When we think about the new world, we've got AI, we've got 3D printing, we've got drones, we've got robots, we've got blockchain, we've got all these technologies coming at your average business, and the business owner doesn't have a clue. So we're trying to help deploy articles and work with our clients on explaining, this is how you can make money. This is how you can fix the problems. This is how you can tackle your industry. In 2026, blockchain value propositions are not 2021 blockchain value propositions. The technology and the market has changed massively. Now, what we're not seeing is a lot of people educating. And so I love these kind of podcasts. These are brilliant. Let's get vocal on educating the world on what you can do with blockchain in 2026. And we're trying to do that. We're trying to get the voice out. How do I mitigate my risks? How do I improve my processes? How do I improve my data security? How do I reduce my costs using blockchain? How do I make new revenue sources? And we're focusing on all of those elements and getting those messages out. So it's a combination of technology, let's make it easy, but also let's help people transition to this new economy and understand how they can participate with what they've got.
Does that answer?
Thanks for the clarity. I do really appreciate it. Yeah, it does. Thanks.
Thank you for throwing in that question over there. So let's have a time next. You can go ahead with your question. Hello, are you there? So we can't hear you right now. I don't know if it's from your end. I can see. Can yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. I really appreciate the opportunity. And Matthew,
Hi,
Okay.
Antoinette. You're very faint.
So Antoinette, you kind of breaking up, so you have to leave and rejoin. to, let's see if your network is stable. You're very faint. We can't really hear. What else? Let's have me and say. You can go ahead with your question, mate. So a question came in from the chat while we wait for Mintai to unmute herself. Someone is asking, the homepage speaks extensively about trust minimization, but says very little about failure scenarios. What is the worst case scenario Instruxi architected against while designing the stack? Malicious insiders, Oracle corruption, governance capture, or regulatory fragmentation?
That's a lot. Okay, great question. Love that question. So it differs for every client and every use case. So when you think about deploying, you've got to create a risk matrix. Now, if you think of some of the protocols that are out there, there's really good governance frameworks for their own ecosystem. When you're joining Web 2 and Web 3 together and you're bringing real world assets, you've got to be thinking across that ecosystem and some of the risks. So you have to build a risk framework, and that risk framework, there are general good principles around how to build a risk framework. So number one, like let's say I'm tokenizing an asset, and let's say that asset is property. When we think about that, and this is a common thing that we've seen since really people have started tokenizing property, is you bring the token on chain, you're now participating in a property investment structure or buying the property in a fragmented way, and someone who has brought the property on chain then takes a loan out against the property underneath the token without telling you. That is a scenario that we have seen, that there are a lot of bad actors out there that have tokenized property, or they've brought property that has no value, that they're just offloading, and they've overinflated the price. So in that example, when we start to work with a client, we need to verify that the asset is owned. Is it on a balance sheet? Who owns it? Who has control of it? Are there any incumbents against it? Then as the token is minted, the data has to stay connected to information. You have to build oracles that mitigate the risk of them selling the asset from under the token and rugging their own token, getting paid twice for the asset. And so we typically only work with institutions and not individuals who are regulated, who are audited, who have a governance framework, they have a board, and they're in a jurisdiction that laws are applied to those organizations to mitigate from them doing that. So we choose the right customers we work with. And then the second thing is we have to build a data framework so that we're constantly verifying the asset. And then the governance framework as to who can control what happens to that asset and how the numbers supporting that asset are published. And then how we have independent third parties attest to the existence of that asset, both through Oracle and signing, multi-signing events, and also the ownership and control of that asset. So we see a lot of assets that come on chain where people are selling those assets, but they don't actually own them, or the quality of that asset hasn't been independently verified. The first question I ask is it on a balance sheet? If it's not on a balance sheet, I can't do anything with it because there is no real structure as to how it can be governed. And of course, you know, if you're doing forward cash flows, etc., that's a different question. But when we're doing with real world assets, is it on a balance sheet? Is it real? Who controls it? Who owns it? And what can the client do with it in a way that would they could end up rugging their own token and undermining their own token, whether it's a stable coin or a fractional ownership of that token or any kind of investment strategy based off that. So it's all part of the design, and it's all part of the consultation. Is it on a balance sheet? That's the question.
Great. I don't know, it was a text question, so probably if he was live, he would be able to explain from what aspect he's coming from. But I hope that answers your question, Jack. And if you have further question, you can definitely head to their Telegram channel, ask whatever more questions you may have. But I think that is all the question we'll be taking for today's AMA. It has really an interesting back and forth conversation with you, Matthew, and how you give your insightful answer, showing how knowledgeable you are about what you guys are building. And it's something listeners and investors always appreciate when the team is well versed in what they are creating. It shows they have the interest of the users of whatever utilities they are building at heart. So I'm sorry if I wasn't able to get to everyone's question. I'm sure the team would always be open to answer whatever question you have. You just have to hop to follow them on X, head to their Telegram channel or on LinkedIn, and you definitely get answers to these questions. So before I close on the VC, Matthew, I'd like to give you the floor to give any concluding statements you may have.
So thank you. Appreciate that. Thank you so much for your time, for everyone attending today. Instruxi is a Latin word, effectively says I build. And our vision is that every person in the world has a wallet where they can control their own ecosystem, their own assets, their own data, and their own life. So we tend to think that I build, we build, and then you build. And so we see that future.
It was a great one with you, Matthew. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. You too. And